When one speaks of museums, what words come to mind? Educational, cultural, sometimes stuffy. But how about controversial, mysterious, intriguing? Hi, I'm Dolly Vasta, and welcome back once again to For Art's Sake. Today we're taping at the East Brunswick Museum, and we're amidst the beautiful old pre-Revolutionary War village here. And there's a controversy that's been brewing at the East Brunswick Museum over a group of papers called the Hoffman papers, and in particular over the Charles A. Lindbergh kidnapping case. My guest today is John Runyon, who is president of the East Brunswick Museum Corporation. John, the East Brunswick Museum has played host to a number of large exhibits. I know they did one on New Jersey pottery, which brought people from all over the state down to see it. Mm-hmm. But probably the largest one you did was the James Crawford Toms exhibit, right?
Yeah, in 1983, excuse me, we had the James Crawford Tom retrospective here at the museum, which was really the most ambitious exhibit the museum had done until that date, and until this date. It was the museum's major exhibit so far in its 15-year history. It was a fabulous exhibit. We had paintings on loan from all over the country, from University of Arizona, the Boston Athenaeum, the Walters Gallery in Baltimore, from the Union League Club in Philadelphia, but most importantly from the family of Governor Harold Hoffman. He was the grandson of the artist James Crawford Tom, and we loaned paintings from the governor's daughter in West Bend, Wisconsin. She owned 7 of James Crawford Tom's paintings that had been her father's, and she was kind enough to allow them to come here all the way from Wisconsin for that exhibit.
That was really the beginning, and almost where our intrigue or mystery or whatever we want to call it really began.
It was, in terms of our involvement with Governor Hoffman, which resulted in our involvement with the Lindbergh case. It all began with the James Crawford Tom retrospective, which is interesting because Lily Hoffman, the governor's widow, the governor died in '54, if my memory serves me correct, and his widow lived in South Amboy, and everybody said she was a recluse. No, she wouldn't talk to anyone. She had just withdrawn from life after her husband passed away. And, but everybody knew that the governor collected the paintings of James Crawford Tom, and he had a house full of them. And so we had to at least try to see her. So I wrote her a letter, thinking I'd never even hear from her. Well, I got a call a couple days later by someone who lived in an apartment in the house, who'd lived there since he was like 18 and was like an amanuensis for the governor, and then took care of Mrs. Hoffman in the house, and said, "Come on down on Saturday." And I went down, and she met with me, and we talked, and she showed me around the house, and showed me all the paintings and the elephant collection, which we see around us here. And
oh, that is fabulous.
Which was in the living room down there. And she took me into the governor's office, which was a separate part of the house, and she took me into the garage, into the barn where the stuff was stored, and that was the governor's, and she just gave me this grand old tour of the whole place. It was really quite wonderful, and she was lovely. I couldn't believe it. She didn't look like a recluse to me. She was a very nice lady, you know.
What prompted her to say to you, not only are we going to donate his immense and fabulous collection of elephants, which are surrounding us, as you said, but to his private papers?
Well, that was the daughter, Hope Hoffman. Her name was Cross at that time. Her husband passed away, and she's since remarried, so it's Hope Nelson now. When her mother passed away in 1984, in December, we had developed a close relationship with the family by that time because of the retrospective. Hope and all of her children and her sister's children, they all came here, and so we developed a close association. And she lived in Wisconsin, and so she asked me to help with some of the work in disposing of the estate. And I had a friend from Christie's in New York come out and take some things for auction in there. And they had gotten to the point of disposing of the things in the garage, and I had earlier told her if they were going to throw anything away that they didn't want, call me first, and I'd see if it had some historical value, whatever. She called me up and said, "Come on down. The garage is full of all the things they brought back here to South Amboy when my father died. There's nothing we can do with it, and if the museum wants it, they can have it." So we went down and looked, and I had seen it before. And the garage was just full of volumes of papers and file cabinets and books and pictures and all kinds of things that had been in his New York place and his Trenton office and had been brought back to South Amboy in '54 after he died. So we just got a truck, and a big truck, and we brought all the stuff back here to the East Brunswick Museum.
Did you know at that time that it contained the Lindbergh case?
Well, we didn't know at the beginning because the garage was full. I mean, you could hardly walk around in it. So we started getting the stuff out, and when we had taken out, see, most of the volumes of his papers were bound, and they were in these big oak wooden shelves, and each shelf was by itself. They were like boxes, if you will. So you had they were piled up to the ceiling. So we had to get all those out. When we got behind them, there was a file cabinet against the wall, or two file cabinets actually, but one of the file cabinets, the labels on the drawers said Lindbergh case, which got my little heart pumping.
That's right. It certainly does pique one's curiosity.
It was very exciting.
Sure.
And but we couldn't open the file cabinets because they were rusted shut. There was a lot of water damage in this garage, and a lot of the papers were so damaged they couldn't even be retrieved. But to make a long story short, we broke the cabinet open, and we opened it up and took them out and sat the drawers in the driveway, and I started to pull them out. And literally my hand started to shake because one of the first files I pulled out contained the handwritten letters that Bruno Richard Hoffman wrote to Governor Harold Hoffman from prison, begging the governor to intervene because he was innocent. These were handwritten by the fellow who was, you know, executed for kidnapping and murdering the Lindbergh baby. These were handwritten letters from him to the governor. They were right there. It was just happened to be the first file I pulled out. My hands were like shaking, and I said, "Hope, do you know what these things are?" And she sort of smiled at me, and she says, I assume what they are. And I said, "Well, you sure you don't want to keep them?" She says, "No." And so we brought them back here to the museum and had them, and then we went, you know, that was the most significant part of it. But what these files were the Governor Hoffman, as a member of the State Court of Pardons and Appeals, was one of the judges who would sit on the appeal for either pardon or commutation or whatever of the sentence. At that time in New Jersey history, the governor couldn't pardon by himself. It was a whole court. I think there were 11 members of the court, and the governor was just one. Well, as a member of that, he started his own investigation in the Lindbergh case, and this investigation lasted until really he died. And these were his personal files on the Lindbergh case and his own investigation of the kidnapping and murder of the Lindbergh baby. So that was included in all of the voluminous materials that we got from, and donations we got from the family, including everything in this room.
Some of our younger viewers may not remember or know of the Lindbergh case. Why don't you give us a little background on it, John?
It's a very complicated thing, but the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped in 1932. They began a mammoth search. A lot of bungling went on, but and they didn't find anything. About a couple of months later, somebody got out of a truck to go into the woods to relieve themselves, and they found a baby in the woods. And doing that, Charles Lindbergh identified it as his son. It was immediately cremated after the identification, and the search continued for the kidnappers. The fact of the matter is that some time went by. They hadn't found anybody for the kidnapping. A guy named Dr. Condon put an ad in the Daily News of Bronx saying he would act as a go-between between the kidnappers and the Lindbergh family. And I suppose the kidnappers were just waiting for the moment when somebody put an ad in the Daily News of the Bronx.
Yes,
I mean, but in any case,
goes into the Daily News, from what I understand.
There was a response. I think it was the Daily Home News is what it's called, the same name as in paper in New Brunswick. But in any case, somebody responded. It was a ransom proposal, $50,000. The ransom money was delivered. They told them where to find the baby. They couldn't find the baby, and boat and alley out along the shore. And shortly thereafter, about that time, President Roosevelt took the country off the gold standard and made all gold notes illegal. And part of the reason, quite honestly, although there were other motivations, was to clear all the gold notes out of society so they couldn't spend the Lindbergh ransom money. Lindbergh ransom money was paid in gold notes.
Well, Charles Lindbergh was a very big hero.
Oh, he was the biggest hero.
Mega hero.
Yeah, he's the biggest hero probably in this century in this country. I mean, he's just idolized by everyone, worshipped. And so was his wife. So anyway, you know, Roosevelt got rid of it. And so these gold notes, if you spent them, they checked every one. After a certain date, you had to turn them in. And then after that date, if you got a gold note, the law required that you check it out against the ransom, serial numbers of the ransom money. And then they found a guy in the Bronx spending gold notes that were, you know, part of the ransom money. They went to his house, ripped his garage apart, found a major portion of the ransom money, and the guy who had it was Bruno Richard Hoffman, who was later executed for it, and that's how they find him. And then, I mean, the whole thing is a little more complex than that, but in a nutshell, that's the history of the case from the kidnapping till they found the...
Why do you think Governor Hoffman started his own investigation?
Well, he was governor at the time.
I mean, do you think he didn't believe what had happened, really?
Well, he did in the beginning, and what happened, well, there are two things. Governor Hoffman, first of all, did not believe in capital punishment. He was way ahead of his time. He was personally opposed to capital punishment, and I'm told, though I haven't checked the record, that he voted to commute the sentence of everybody who was convicted and sentenced to death. He just didn't believe in it. Second of all, as a member of the court, he began to review the record. And as governor, he was the only member of the court who could tell the state police to give him various investigative reports from the state police files. So he was the first person who had access to the complete investigation of the New Jersey State Police. And as he began to review the materials he requested from the state police files, he became skeptical about different aspects of the prosecution and the case and the evidence. For instance, on this witness stand, Charles Lindbergh identified Bruno Richard Hoffman as the person who yelled, "Hey, Doc," in the cemetery in New York when the ransom money was delivered. Charles Lindbergh, on 2 previous occasions and in sworn statements, said that there was no possible way he could identify this person as looking like the person or the voice as being the voice of the person in the cemetery. These were sworn statements prior to the trial. But in the trial, on the stand, Charles Lindbergh positively identified him as the man. Yes, that's him, I recognize him, and 2, yes, that was his voice. Now today, with the right of discovery, a prosecutor, I mean the defendant's attorneys would be saying, "Mr. Lindbergh, in your earlier statements you said that in fact you couldn't possibly identify this guy. Why is it that today you can identify him and you couldn't identify him, you know, the first 2 times they asked you to do this?" And so Harold Hoffman saw these kinds of things, and he began to wonder. And he finally reached the conclusion that the guy couldn't possibly have acted alone. I think he had the conclusion that the guy really didn't do it, that he probably was involved in some extortion case. But anyway, because of that and all kinds of other things, Dolly, he mounted his own investigation and sought to the very end to keep them from executing Hoffman. And he didn't have the authority to do that on his own, but and as a matter of fact, he ordered stays of execution, which were not his power, not his authority. The only way he got away with it is because the warden of the Trenton State Prison was a friend of his and would listen to him. But it was totally unconstitutional. He had no authority to do that, but he felt so strongly about it. So that began, you know, a whole series of events which continue, quite honestly, to this day.
That's right.
And it's the intrigue, the difficulties, the lives that have been ruined, the tangled web that has been woven. I mean, it is just incredible to me that it continues to this day, because in taking that position, he was fighting, you know, David Wilentz, who was the prosecutor, and he was fighting General Schwarzkopf, who was the head of the, at that time, Colonel Schwarzkopf, who was the head of the state police. And he was fighting some very powerful people in trying to mandate the innocence or find the innocence or prove the innocence of this guy. And Harold Hoffman lost that fight, and he also lost his life as a result. But the fight continues, the intrigue continues. I suppose there'll be a battle over the Lindbergh case always. But this was the governor's files, and we retrieved them, and we got them here at the East Brunswick Museum.
And now 50 years later, the state police want these papers?
Yeah, they do want them. As a matter of fact, they have them. When we found them, we had them for a number of months, and we had the exhibition opening the exhibit of all this element collection and all the other memorabilia of Governor Harold Hoffman. It was in the newspaper, widely reported. I got a call from the state police, and they asked us if we had anything that would have been relevant to the trial or anything of that. And I said, yes, we have the governor's personal files on his investigation of the Lindbergh case. Well, they almost went crazy. They did go crazy. They became so excited. And the fact that we had an envelope that said baby's fingerprints. We had all these original...
you also had some pretty gruesome pictures, too.
Yeah, we had the pictures, the pictures from when they found the baby in the woods, which weren't too pleasant. But we had a lot of stuff that had come from state police files, plus the governor's own personal investigation. Now, the governor conducted a private investigation with his own time and money, and it was conducted out of a hotel down in Trenton. It was not done in the governor's office or a part of his regular duties. He had a lot of people he paid and who were volunteers who worked in the investigation. And when he got stuff from the state police files, he sent it over to the hotel, and it was just incorporated into his files in general. So the state police came up and they looked at this and they wanted to take it all away. We wanted to maintain the integrity of the governor's file for historical purposes. If something was in a file, it was there for a reason. We didn't want this thing just ripped apart. We acknowledged that there were some things that came from state police files that belonged to the state police that the governor had never returned, and we agreed that they should be returned. We didn't have the time to inventory that, though, so what we did was we agreed if they would copy everything, they could take all the originals down to Trenton. They said they would dump into the computer, an inventory of all these documents, and after that was done, then we'd sit down and go through it and decide what belonged with the state police and what was a part of the governor's possessions, and then we would get back the stuff that belonged to us, and they would keep what had come from state police files. So they brought a Xerox machine here, had 20 state policemen at long tables inventorying these papers, and we would go through it page by page to make sure they copied every single page. There was about 22,000 pages worth of stuff. And they did that. We have the copies. They are, except for a few things they couldn't copy on a Xerox machine, which they still haven't given us copies of that stuff yet, although they promise now that they will. And they took all the originals to Trenton. And they never produced the detailed inventory. We've never sat down to go over what's theirs and what ours, and they're maintaining the position now that everything they took belongs to them.
And it doesn't, you feel?
No, it clearly doesn't. Had nothing to do with that. I mean, he did have stuff on the Lindbergh case from before he was governor, and his personal investigation on the trial continued until he died. There's stuff in there from the 40s and 50s. I mean, his interest continued. And this was not paid for taxpayers' money. It was not conducted in taxpayers' property. It's clearly a personal investigation that the governor had. Now, in those files were things that came from the state police files. They should go back to the state police. I'm not even, sure what the law is that would require that after 50 years, but the fact of the matter is that we agreed that they should go back. And they have these things. And then they took other things that clearly have nothing to do with the Lindbergh case that they should give back to us.
There's a new book out that stated that Charles Lindbergh killed his own baby in it. There was a cover-up and so on and so forth. Do you think that is the reason that they might want these records after all this time?
Well, I think they want the records after all these times because they're hysterical about the possibility that, in fact, everybody was wrong and this guy didn't kidnap the Lindbergh baby. I mean, I'm convinced of that. I mean, they are so uptight about the reputation of the New Jersey State Police. I asked at one point why, because at the news conference when they met the press to discuss the finding of all these papers, the head of the State Police, Colonel Pagano, he sat there and he lied about things. Absolutely lied. And I leaned over and I said something to one guy who was next to me, a deputy attorney general, told him, and he leaned over and he whispered to Pagano to try to clear, and he lied. He repeated the same things again. The fact of the matter is either he didn't know what he was talking about or he was intentionally lying. But they both, the colonel or the major I was talking to said that if it was found that the state police made them, bungled this thing, it would be bad for morale, which just blows my mind. I mean, my God, this happened 50 years ago. There's only 2 guys left who were on the state police then, who are still alive, who were involved in the case. Who could it hurt? But they are very concerned, and a lot of people are concerned, that the governor's papers and all of his materials could prove substantially that this fellow either didn't act alone or wasn't responsible for the kidnapping. And a lot of reputations, careers, and fortunes have been based upon the successful prosecution of this man in the Lindbergh case. There's just no You know, no doubt about it, to the point that when I was in Colonel Pagano's office, in the morning of the news conference, they were talking about the news conference and what they were going to say, and they kept referring to the general. They kept saying, "Did you talk to the general about this? Have you cleared it with the general?" And I said, "General." So I said, I was on a couch on the other side of the room just listening to their conversation while they were huddling about how they were going to handle the press conference, and I was just there in the background. And I said to this fellow Sergeant Plebeni who was next to me, I said, "What general are they talking about? Who's this general?" And they said, "General Wilentz." I mean, up in, you know, Wilentz was Attorney General, and the state police refer to the Attorney General as General, but the Attorney General was in the room, and they were talking about another general, so I don't know who this general was. It was, even in the late 80s, when Wilentz, David Wilentz was a very old man, the state police were still clearing, talking, and reviewing how they were handling things with the Lindbergh case with David Wilentz. Now, doesn't that blow your mind? The fact of the matter is that David Wilentz is instrumental, and part of his power over the years was his influence over the New Jersey State Police. It continued till the day he died, although he was in bad shape at the end. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, some very powerful people in their own minds have a tremendous amount at stake. Like those fingerprints I told you, we had the baby's fingerprints.
Right.
I mean, it just blew their minds that we could have these fingerprints that might prove that the 11 men and 1 woman who claim they're the Lindbergh baby, there is a woman who claimed, I think, that, you know, that
Well,
those fingerprints, well, who knows,
yes.
that their fingerprints might match what could have been. They don't know for sure these were the baby's fingerprints, but they found them on balls in the crib and things. And so, you know, they're just very, very paranoid about the whole thing.
If it happened today, there would be appeal after appeal after appeal.
Well, first of all, I don't think he could have ever gotten convicted of kidnapping Lindbergh baby. They only had circumstantial evidence. There was no smoking gun or anything like that. It's very difficult. And besides, with the right of discovery, which defense attorneys have now to find out everything that's in in the prosecution's files before the trial, there's so much evidence in there that would say this guy is innocent. So many eyewitnesses that place him elsewhere when he was supposed to be kidnapping the baby or scoping the house out. So much contradiction in the witnesses in their pre-trial. Dr. Condon, the fellow like Charles Lindbergh, his statements on identifying Hoffman in the courtroom are contradiction of everything his sworn statements up until the moment he took the witness stand said.
There were a lot of books written about this from time to time.
Well, there are a whole series of books. You know, the one about, you know, we said about Charles Lindbergh killing his baby. That's really not a new theory. That was a theory that was around in the 30s, and then it was sort of discarded. But some new evidence has come to light, like a letter from Anmar Lindbergh to her mother-in-law decrying the fact that Charles Lindbergh was such a beast and an animal towards the kid, and she was afraid for the baby's safety. I mean, Anmar Lindbergh apparently said that to her mother-in-law. So that's some of the basis that they've developed this new theory that Charles Lindbergh, not new, but re-emerging theory that Charles Lindbergh may have accidentally killed the baby himself and invented this whole thing, and then it just got out of hand.
But there's another one, too, that claims he was the, you were talking about it
Well,
earlier.
there's a Olson, I think his name's Charles Olson. He's from Connecticut. He has the best claim of being the Lindbergh baby. He has, you know, the most interesting information about it. He's written a book. And he looks like the Lindbergh family. We have a book here somewhere which has pictures of Charles Lindbergh, Anmar Lindbergh, and all of their children, and a picture of him. And I mean, if you stood them together in a family group, you couldn't say which fellow is the faker. He looks so much like Anmar Lindbergh, it is shocking. I mean, it's absolutely shocking. Now, whether it was the Lindbergh baby or not, I don't know. I don't think it'll ever be proven one way or the other. But certainly, the guy has a case that is not totally irrational. There are a lot of other irrational people. I get calls all the time. One fellow was calling me. I could never call him back, and then I found out he was calling from a payphone in a mental institution in Louisiana. So, I mean, there are all kinds of Lindberghs all over the place. But this fellow has at least a case that, if not credible, is just not wacko, insane, and crazy. I mean, there's some rational basis for his allegations and claims that he's a Lindbergh baby. Well, we'll never know. But as I was saying, I think they want these things. They want to have control over them in the first instance to make sure there was nothing in there that would be threatening or incriminating. And then you have to remember that at the time these papers discovered, Mrs. Hoffman Bruno Richard Hauptmann's widow was suing the state for $125 million for wrongful death. And so they felt that perhaps some of these papers might be of assistance to her case. At that time, of course, it was thrown out of court for, you know, that the time had run, you know, statute of limitations. It was just too late for her to sue for such a thing. And so she's never gotten anywhere in the courts or politically either. But I basically believe that as far as Harold Hoffman is concerned, there's an animus towards him and they hate him. They believe that the very powerful people in New Jersey who've made careers, fortunes, and the rest as a result of becoming famous and everything else, Schwarzkopf, Lenses, all those, there's still an ongoing paranoia that perhaps someone could prove something that would be damaging to their historical integrity and reputation.
Now, you still hear from Mrs. Hoffman, don't you?
Yes, and Mr. Richard Hoffman, Bruno Hoffman's, the
Right.
state calls him Bruno. His first name was Bruno.
I know, I never knew his last name. It was
She calls him the fellow who
Bruno.
was executed for the Lindbergh kidnapping.
That's quite a poignant letter, too.
Yeah, I have a letter. Yeah, we correspond
Do me a favor,
occasionally.
read some of it.
Well, I can read these. Excuse me for taking my glasses off, but you know I'm getting old. Yeah, it's an amazing letter. She says, I hope and pray that Richard's name would be cleared. He was as innocent as you and I. If Governor Florio would stand up for the truth and declare my husband was innocent, the public, the whole world would look up to him, admire him. He would be a greater hero than Colonel Lindbergh because he had the courage to stand up for the truth. I wrote and I begged your governor if I could see him. The answer was no. He had no time for Anna Hoffman, or was he afraid to hear the truth? I still pray for him. Every witness for the prosecution lied. They swore in the Bible to tell the truth. They lied. Some were paid to lie. Colonel Lindbergh lied. He never heard my husband say, "Hi, doctor," because Richard was never there. They all have to stand before God someday. When I die, I do not have to be afraid. I always told the truth. I always will. God is with me, and He gives me the strength to carry on this bitter fight. I will never give up the fight for the truth. My husband did not kidnap the Lindbergh baby. Sincerely, Anna Hoffman.
And so, some 60 years later, the intrigue, the mystique, the mystery of the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby still hasn't been quite solved. I hope you all enjoyed the show. If you get a chance, drop down on weekends to the East Brunswick Museum. They're located on Maple Avenue, and enjoy this wonderful collection. I'll see you all next month. In the meantime, take care.